And now we're on to round two, and this doesn't go so well for us. It kind of highlights some inherent problems with this archetype, though I think in different draws or better circumstances, these are all kind of acceptable problems that you wouldn't get too excited about. But it's a combination of some inherent weaknesses compared to this matchup, a couple of key bad decisions on my part that kind of make it interesting here. This hand here is not too bad, and against like many decks, it can actually be decent, especially the combo pseudo control that most of the cube is made out of. But unfortunately, I end up going against this mono green ramp up deck, and this is just not the hand I should have kept. I mean, I kind of got my eyes fixated here, like, oh, okay, I can go Soul Ring turn one. Next, I can get this guy ramping out. I can have tons of mana. I'm thinning my deck. This is a good circumstance. But the weakness I was kind of referencing that highlights is that this deck is really strong against the combo-y, goofy decks, and occasionally good to really strong against the aggro decks in certain circumstances. But against these kind of mid-range dirtly decks, where they can kind of get out a big guy or difficult guy early, but not quite enough that would really beat most other more higher tier decks, I kind of get in an awkward circumstance where in a good draw I can crush them or get really competitive against them, but against a bad one I give them enough time to get somewhere. And that's unfortunately what happened here. I'm got a 2-2 in play. I'm playing another 2-2 that can do stuff and be interesting, but it's not really where we want it to be. For instance, we got the Hydra here, which is a very solid card, and many other cubes could be really good. But at the end of the day, it's so manageable. And with some different draws, wouldn't even been a problem to us. But the problem is we kind of created in this game an area where he has the breathing room to make it serious. The problem with the Hydra is it can be really strong, but it takes 3 or 4 spells to get a 4/4, 5/5, a 6/6. And even then, that's not the most threatening thing ever in the Vintage Cube. And eventually, you could just draw into removal, and it's pointless because it doesn't leave him behind anything, and it took so many turns and other spells to get to that point. But we don't really put the pressure here that we need to, and we're not really drawing the spells we need to, and it's just not a great circumstance. Now, I think I have plenty of removal and plenty of other stuff in this thing that would have just solved this. For instance, here, I have a very fateful decision that ends up, I think, in the end of the day, kind of costing me the game. We're going to go Liliana. Our idea is like, okay, if he just has the Hydra, eventually I'll draw into removal. Or more importantly, I could reanimate my big guy, and it will be bigger enough to stop this Hydra no matter what spells we cast. And then I can just stop casting spells at that point because I'll have something big enough to crush him. And the Hydra will be great and all, but it won't do anything great. So I'm like, you know what? Let's attack the hand. Let's break him down. But as you can see in my opponent's graveyard, it's kind of unusual. He threw away his Eureka right away. He must not have had anything in hand to really build that circumstance, or he felt confident in what he had. So it kind of leaves you in an awkward spot because part of the reason I didn't throw a Tarka is A, I assumed I was going to be able to do multiple discards with Liliana, so I didn't want to throw in the graveyard early just in case he has something that could remove something from a graveyard, especially because I don't have any reanimate spells currently, because tossing the graveyard doesn't do much different than tossing the land. And secondly, I kind of was assuming that he was going to at some point try some Eureka type shenanigans, and that would at least allow me to drop a fatty. But instead, the first activation off of Liliana, he's tossing the very spell I was trying to wait for. And that's what makes this circumstance so frustrating. Hydra is manageable. All the things he's cast, he has no more hand. It's a lot of nothing. I mean, the most potent I think he actually has is the Maze of It, because that can eventually hold down the fatty forever, but doesn't actually kill anything. His Planeswalker is only really good if you're using those little 1/1s to either swarm a guy, which is very rare to abuse in that particular way in the Vintage Cube, or more importantly, just to use them as ramp, and eventually cast some kind of Eldrazi. But as we see later, and maybe I'm wrong and he had something in his deck, but I don't think he really had that many big things in there where the ramp was actually worth anything. So he's just making 1/1s. That's really frustrating because the most potent thing it does is kill my Soul Ring, which really isn't that big of a deal, especially in the way my deck is. I got the value I needed off of it, and it'd been nice to have, but I can overcome that loss. It's not really any impact on the board, but I'm not really doing much here, and he's got this Hydra that keeps getting bigger and bigger. I'm just not putting any counter pressure to make him have to hold it back or anything. I don't really get any guys that can trade for it. I've kind of created a circumstance of my own doing, but part of that's based on good common sense. I draw too many lands, which I don't really need, so I'm not really doing any action, and the few things I did do were small. But I got removal. I got ways to make giant guys that can deal with it, or can kill them, or so big they could block, push them to shove for indefinite till I reanimate a second guy. But instead, I'm not doing much. Outside of his Genesis wave, he doesn't really do much. And even when he does cast, it's only casting for 4, and he just kind of gets a little lucky, gets a couple guys, a bit more importantly Garrick, and then all of a sudden now he's in a really solid position that should be manageable. I have a spell that kills the creatures, or it can kill planeswalkers. I don't draw that. This Hydra gets in there, but if I kill it, he goes off of Garrick, let's say this next turn, if I had magically drawn something to kill the Hydra, well, he's getting me for a good amount in my face, but if I can block well enough, I can prevent it. It's not too much. It's not quite lethal, hypothetically. It'll be pretty close. um, and because I made the fateful decision not to toss Tarka, kind of based on the assumption that this is the kind of deck where they're going to make both players drop something, and if it's not, I can kind of plan or expect for it. Instead, he didn't. He threw the Eureka first, so I'm stuck with this card that I literally could never cast. And then I'm drawing the Reanimate spell that could have maybe got it back and maybe let me do something. I could have put Garrick and tried to block the Hydra or trade off or something. We're both 8/8s. And then maybe I can see if I can find a way to stabilize, even though this is not a good circumstance. It's just kind of frustrating. Now, a lot of people would think this is a cheap loss. At the end of the day, I don't always agree with that because at the end of the day, if they have a thing that works, it's good enough. If you can, that's the whole point of this kind of draft we're going for here. Find the pinch points, and he happens to have a deck that's not that good, but against mine, it's got a pinch point. The creatures are a little bigger than usual, not enough to brawl with the really strong guys, but big enough to create a pressure that you can't totally let go, like some weenies where you can let the little ones hit you a couple times. So it demands removal, solid removal. And if you don't have it, all of a sudden it can get a little bit in there. I still think our deck's really solid. It doesn't have the raw power of a pure Reanimator deck, but I think it's still got lots of outs. But against a Dirtly deck, we kind of give enough time to get there. You know, that's the problem with the Vintage Cube. Every single deck at least has one good windmill slam. Some combination of cards or one really big guy that over enough time is going to get cast. And it's going to be a serious threat. So you got to kind of not let them have the time to set that up if they're a weak deck. Because if you were a good aggro or a good control deck, this guy would get taken apart. But instead, we're kind of doing something that would be really good against a lot of decks, but we're not really doing anything that's really that satisfying against him. I mean, Liliana alone, not that I relied on her for removal, has that really strong sacrifice effect that, since the high quality of all the creatures in the cube, can be really solid, even if you get the second best guy has out. But instead, he has a bunch of elves that, except for Genesis Wave, he's kind of ramping into stuff that doesn't really do much. And those elves are kind of protecting him from Liliana's sacrifice effect, because you really just don't want to be using it to just kill these puny little ramp elves. And it's just kind of a frustrating situation all around. And you'll see what I mean here in a second, because I'm looking at my hands right now, and this is like a really solid start against them. I got, I can just Flame Cone Kavu, a random thing to kind of set him back one. Anything medium size you cast, I can kill with it. And now I got Deluge, and that's really solid. And then more important, I got Liliana, which will both chuck my big guys to the graveyard and then just wear down his hand, because since he has so many like little 1/1 mana dorks, If I happen to hit or kill his best cards, his leftovers just 1/1s. They're not that good, and I can easily get around them. He has Lotus Cobra, which I think is very solid and needs to get more love in this cube. It's actually quite good. But the rest of his are just Ladder Royals without really ramping out any good 4 or 5 drops really fast, so he's not really doing that. I mean, he's got Thrun, which you kind of expect. Any kind of mono green deck, you should basically expect at some point Thrun's going to come around because it always just seems to get picked up by them. But, that's not even the worst thing ever. It's just a card that's a little bit more annoying. Now I'm looking here, I'm like, oh, this is pretty sweet. I couldn't be sitting prettier. I got a reanimation target, so all I got to do now is find a reanimation spell at some point. I got Liliana to wear down whatever hand he has left. And now I can just look at this, and even though it stinks that we're going to lose the Pack Rat, that's not a big deal because I don't need it for this card outlet anymore, and I can kill 4 of his guys in one swoop, much less that 3 of them are intended for him ramping, leaving him with just 3 lands, 2 that are only producing colorless mana. I mean, this is just should be a blowout. It should just be wonderful. But ironically, learning my lesson from the last game ends up having a detrimental cost, a serious detrimental cost for me in this game. And it's a little frustrating. I'm not as upset with this one because when you end up seeing what happens, it's kind of something you expect, kind of like that's what happens in this cube. But ironically, I make faithful decisions that cost me games for completely opposite reasons. Okay, let's drop this. Let's not make the same mistake we did last time. Let's get it set up for a good reanimation spell just in case you get something dorky. If you catch anything between or even just a ramp guy, I got my Flamington Kavu sitting back that can get in there and can kill the little guys in the meantime, and I'm just sitting pretty. This is like, okay, we gotta start thinking about game 3. We'll use this to gain information. And then this happens. Eureka. The same Eureka that he had solo confidence or didn't have a consistent enough amount of big guys in his deck to be worth it. Well, now he's tossing it just after he tossed their huge guy. Which, oh god. I mean, if we had had it in our hand, we could have won here. He's gotten Protogenesis up. His best case scenario has occurred. Which, by the way, further underlates his Mana Dorks and his Planeswalker that makes Mana Dorks was bad, because this is not even a big guy that, an emergency situation you can ramp into with that sort of stuff. It 100% requires you to cheat it to play, meaning he isn't really committed enough to either really emphasizing the cheating to play strategy or the ramp strategy with what he's kind of built with his deck. But if we had the Eldrazi in hand, the best case scenario happens, and we still can outrace him because we get to attack first, because our Summoning Sickness falls off first. And we can even attack and have him block it or something silly like that, and it doesn't kill it because we're a little bigger than his Protogenesis, even if he does have protection from everything. It's kind of an interesting circumstance, but his kind of middling kind of thing ends up just being the worst case scenario for us. He's dropping Eureka after we've tossed our guy, so we don't really got anything in play to fight him with. He happens to get Garrick, so if we had gotten any kind of removal, or if he hadn't had Garrick, Liliana's taken care of, the one big guy he got into play, and instead he keeps making tokens that we can't really get around, and we're not drawing the removal to remove it, and just kind of a lot of nothing's happening, and he had the time to set up a windmill slam and punch us in the face. So I still think that this particular deck is really solid, but if you don't know when you have to kind of tighten up your game and put a bit more teeth or mulligan to have a bit stronger approach, you can let weaker decks gain the advantage on you.